Everybody. Welcome to those who are watching the webinar for the first time, and welcome to those who are watching the rerun for the first time. I'd like to talk a little bit about why this first slide, why we're actually licensed as real estate agents. A lot of individuals think that we're licensed to have a great career, or we're licensed to have a great income. There's only one reason, and one reason only, why we're licensed as real estate professionals, and that's actually to protect the public. It's important to understand that you find a real estate agent who is going to help you in your purchase in protecting your interest at hand. You know, with rental properties, there's a lot of agents out there that will tell people that, hey, this is the greatest investment that you could ever buy. Well, if it's and they call that puffing. But if it's a great investment, then that agent should actually back that up with the numbers. You know, puffing's fine in some situations, like, for example, this is the most beautiful view from this house lot. That's puffing, and that can be understood. But when you're puffing with regard to rental properties, you better, as an agent, you better have the facts to back that up, because it's a fine line between puffing and protecting the public when buying rental properties. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about formulas and being able to buy rental properties right the first time with those formulas. So to understand that, we have to have a knowledge or a background, you as an investor, with the annual property operating data, or the apod, the gross rent multiplier, the net rent multiplier, and also the net operating income. These four topics that we'll be going over are extremely important when buying rental properties right the first time. You don't want to just go out there because the interest rates are low and buy a rental property based on just stupid ideas. You want to have it backed up with these four acronyms, and also you want to be able to realize that there are other things that you need to be aware of when buying rental properties right the first time. For example, the turnaround cycle or the neighborhood change of where the property is located at. You want to know what the tenant mix is like. You want to understand and know exactly what's going on in that neighborhood. What type of tenant mix, what stage in the turnaround cycle. I have some videos on the turnaround cycle that it's important for you to understand when buying rental properties right the first time, and in fact, any type of property. So the turnaround cycle is extremely important. But these acronyms here, your apod, the GRM, the net rent multiplier, and the NOI, are very, very important, and you need to understand these to keep the sellers honest when buying your rental properties right the first time. Here's the formula here. This is the apod. You have your gross scheduled income, or your GSI, and then you subtract your vacancy rate, and then you add your other income, and then you have your effective gross income, and then you subtract your operating expenses, and that will equal your net operating income. So remember when we talked about your NOI? The NOI is probably the most important part of this whole formula when buying your rental properties right the first time. So after that, you subtract your debt service, and that's just mortgage payment only. And then that equals your cash flow. And then as you go down a little bit further, your capital expense would be things like heating systems or big chunks of money that are paid out to improve the property. And then you get your net cash flow. So remember these line items. If you have a piece of paper, you might want to write these down, and also put the plus or minus or equal sign to the left side of those line items. Okay, so the gross scheduled income. Let's say that you have a fourplex, and that fourplex is generating $500 per month. So that would be $2,000 per month, and you times that by 12. All your figures on the apod will need to be an annual figure. So you take your 500 times 4 units is 2,000 per month times 12 months. Your gross scheduled income then is $24,000. So you have your $24,000. Let's take your vacancy. Let's say that you've only had one vacancy throughout the whole year during that 12-month period, and that vacancy was 500. Now, there's going to be vacancies, I'm just making this simple, but you're going to have a vacancy factor sometimes with a $500 unit of $450 or $479.82 or an offset number. You need to figure that out, and I'm sure you know how to do that. If you don't, I'll have a video on that as well. But anyway, you subtract your vacancy, $500. So if you figure that out, you take the 500 and 24,000 divided into 500, and you get 2%. So your vacancy rate is actually a little bit higher than 2%. It's 0.0208333. I think it will go to Repeten 3, but the 2% vacancy is what you're figuring on a particular property that we're giving you the example on. Then you have your other income. Other income would be things like vending machines, the laundry room, late fees, parking fees, lease violations, deductions on the security deposit. Non-refundable security deposits are considered income, so you need to be aware of that. So those are things that are other income, and there's many more things that could be considered other income, but I'm just mentioning these few items. Okay, now we have our effective gross income. The effective gross income, yes, you add your gross scheduled income minus your vacancy and add your other income, and that equals your effective gross income. So the next items will be as follows: operating expenses and so on. Now your operating expenses could be a variety of things, and there's probably things that are not even listed here, but there's a lot of things that can be considered as operating expenses. For example, your taxes, your insurance, your plumbing, lawn care, sprinklers, cooler systems, advertising, property management. They can vary a lot, but let's just toss out a number. Let's just say that your operating expense for this particular property is $3,700. So you take your gross scheduled income minus your vacancy rate, add your other income equals your effective gross income minus your operating expenses that we threw out a number of $3,700, and then that equals your net operating income. So your objective is to create the highest possible NOI that you can as a property manager and also an owner to the property. Your NOI is extremely important in your apod. Okay, now you have your debt service. Your debt service is your mortgage. Let's say that the fourplex is purchased at $250,000 and you put 20% down for 30 years at 4% interest. Your monthly payment is going to be $954.83. So you take that $954.83 and you times it by 12, and you get $11,457.97. So that would be your debt service for a whole year. And then your cash flow. So you subtract your debt service and you come up with a cash flow of $86.4203. That's not your cash flow, that's the property's cash flow. There's different numbers that you have to implement on figuring your cash flow based, and it's different from the property's cash flow. There's figures like internal rate of returns and things like that, and other formulas that you need to figure for your cash flow, not the property's cash flow, or both. Excuse me. So then you have your vacancy set at 2%, your other income set at 1%, or a little over 1%. And remember that the way that you figure this out, your effective gross income is 99%. You take the 23,800 divided by the 24,000, and that's how you get that percentage. Your operating expense, 15%. Your net NOI, 84%, which is really good on this particular property. And then you have your debt service. And then, of course, you have your cash flow. So the property cash flow on this particular property is 36%, which is really good for a double-digit return that your property is making. Now, of course, you have your capital expenses too. And your capital expenses, let's say you had a furnace, or you had some major repairs on the property that you had to pay for a capital improvement. Let's say that was $3,500. So you subtract that from your 86,4203, and you'll get a net cash flow of 51,4203. So again, this is the apod. This is extremely important for you to understand what the apod is and how to use it when you buy your rental properties right the first time. So your capital expense 15%, and your net cash flow is 21%, which is still pretty good. So anyway, now that you understand what the apod is, it's important to understand what the gross rent multiplier is, and also your net rent multiplier. So in order to make your offer right the first time, you need to take your gross rent multiplier, or your GRM, and that's a rough guideline for comparing properties, and you use the formula for your initial offer. So the gross rent multiplier is going to vary from location based on age, and derived by annual rents and things like that. And that's not allowing for any vacancies. So you take your annual gross rents on the property that you're looking at for your initial offer, but you don't allow anything for vacancies. And then you add your other income to that number with the selling price of the building with the same type and that was recently sold in the same location. So before you make an offer on a property, you're going to have to accept the seller's words on the numbers. And once you start figuring out the net rent multiplier, you're going to dig in a little bit deeper to make the seller honest with your offer. So you don't really want to waste your time if the price does not fit within the with what you're going to negotiate with the seller. So now that you understand a little bit about the gross rent multiplier, you can also Google this on Google. Google gross rent multiplier, and that will give you some added information on it. So let's say that based on the apod that I showed you in the previous slides, let's say that your purchase price on a property is $250,000, and then your income on the property is $24,000. That's without subtracting vacancies and things like that. That's your gross scheduled income. So what you do is you divide that by the $250,000, and your gross rent multiplier becomes 10%. And the lower the gross rent multiplier, the better the deal is for you as the buyer, provided that the properties that you look at are equal in every aspect. So the lower the gross rent multiplier, the lower the purchase price for the same income. So if you take a $90,000 building and had an annual gross income of $10,000, your gross rent multiplier would be 9. And remember, the lower the gross rent multiplier, the better the deal. Now let's talk about the net rent multiplier. The net rent multiplier is used for calculating your final purchase on the property. and it's got to be an accurate, realistic figure. So you're going to have to figure out what the NOI is in your apod. You're going to have to figure out all the details of your operating expenses, your vacancy, other income, and so forth. You have to have all those uh, uh, written down in actual numbers. And to determine the net rent multiplier, you need the real figures on the net operating income, or your NOI. So the way that you figure this out is you have a $250,000 property, and your net operating income will equal your net rent multiplier. So what you do is you take your $250,000, and you, from our example, we figured that your net operating income, or your NOI, is $20,100. So you divide that into the 250,000, or the 250,000 into that, and you get an 8% net rent multiplier. And the lower the NRM, the better the buy is for you. So the lower the net rent multiplier, the higher the profit. So this here is also important for you to understand with your net rent multiplier. Now, if you have an agent that has no clue what the net, if you ask him, hey, what's your understanding of the NRM, or the gross rent multiplier, or the net operating income, if they have a blank stare at you, you need to go find another real estate agent, because you're not going to make rational decisions when buying a rental property if a real estate agent does not understand and know what it means to buy property, rental property, the first time. So now that you understand this, it's important to follow these steps, and your real estate agent needs to be aware of these steps in order to help you in your best interest. Now remember, we are licensed to protect the public. If you deal with a real estate agent that has no clue what the gross rent multiplier is, or the net rent multiplier is, or the apod, or your net operating income, you're going to have some issues. You might end up buying a property that you wish you hadn't. You also need to have a real estate agent that understands and knows behavioral management. Now, when I say behavioral management, that's property management, but when I say behavioral management, I'm also referring to the behaviors that are going on in the neighborhood, your turnaround cycle, what is affecting that neighborhood. And are those things making it so that the individual that owns the fourplex wanting to sell, does he want to get out of the neighborhood because of certain situations? Or if he knows that the city is changing zoning or doing different things, you want to know these things to keep your seller honest. So what you do is you find out about these properties, and you ask for the price and the rents and the expenses, so that you can calculate your gross rent multiplier, and also your net rent multiplier if you get into the next phase of having interest in actually buying the place. So you have to base all this information to know the final multipliers that will make this a good buy or a bad buy. So what you do is first you drive around different areas, neighborhoods, and you check the properties out. Now, some of you may, when you buy rental properties, you need to know what the tenant mix is and what you will be dealing with in your behavioral management. Are you going to be dealing with student housing? Are you going to be dealing with young married couples? Properties will attract tenant types, and policies will always attract tenant types. If you are dealing with student housing, you're going to have at times Daytona Beach, Florida spring break. And do you want to mentally handle that? Do you want to deal with that type of behavioral management? Do you want 5 cars on your single family home and one car is always parked on the lawn? Do you want the neighbors to be calling you at 12 in the morning because the neighbor has a stereo blasting full blast? Those are things that you have to look at. Policies will always attract your best type of tenants. every time. If you have a policy that says no mechanical work to be done on the premises, you have to be bold in your policies and evict when needed to maintain a tenant mix, because policies will always attract your best type of tenants. So when you drive around these properties, in this slide here, number 2, when you drive around these properties, you need to determine whether or not, is this a property that's going to be something that I want to deal with as far as behavioral management goes. So if it is, you try to base it off of what is compared to the other property that you're looking at. So you talk to the tenants and do things like that. Number 3, you check with your real estate agent and see if these properties have been sold recently, and so that you can get rental rates and figure out the selling price in the area to determine to determine what your rent should be. So all of this will tie into your gross rent multiplier and your net rent multiplier. Then the sales income and expense information. You can establish both correct gross rent multiplier and the correct net rent multiplier when you're evaluating the property. And with all the information you have, it's time to negotiate the offer now. And you need a real estate agent that knows how to negotiate and how to tie properties up so that nobody else can buy them. So when you do your analysis, you can make your initial offer that, okay, this is what we want to make the offer on. In our example with the apod, $250,000. But if any of these things do not go along with your numbers, your gross rent multiplier, your net rent multiplier, you need to be willing to walk away from the property. So we make an offer to tie up the property so that you can do all your evaluations to determine your net rent multiplier, and then you make an offer based on those figures. And you need to make your offer based on the basis of that you have to sell tomorrow. So you don't want to be getting screwed in your purchase. So I mentioned about keeping the seller honest. A lot of times they won't have correct other income numbers and so forth. So if there's any deviations whatsoever from the seller's records and what you find out, and I promise you those deviations will always happen, it's just going to open up real negotiations when you start finding out these deviations. And this is what will take place during your due diligence on the property. So you want to find those deviations, and you will always want to change your offer based on these deviations. And so the things that you need to watch out for these deviations would be your rent, your other income, your laundry, your vacancy, security deposits. There's one other thing I just want to touch on because it just came through my mind. Laundry. A lot of properties in the 1970s and early 1980s had laundromats on the say a 20-unit apartment complex. Instead of having the laundry facility inside the unit, they had laundromats on the property. And usually if you have a laundromat on the property, you're targeting tenants who are transient tenants, here today, gone tomorrow. You don't want to furnish your properties, in my opinion. If you want to deal with transient tenants, tenants who are short-termers, then you'll be dealing with college students, and you may be furnishing properties. But back to the laundry room. What used to be an amenity is now a necessity today. So the amenity was a laundry room, coin-operated laundry room at one time, but it's a necessity today based on the type of tenant mix that you're dealing with to have the laundry room actually inside the apartment. So your vacancy factor might increase if you're focusing on, I call them tenants by choice, but tenants can be categorized into two different groups, tenants by choice and tenants by circumstance. Tenants by choice would be career people, elderly people, young married couples, people who actually want to call a place home even though they're renting, and they back up everything with their time, their energy, commitment, and money. They're there because they want to invest their money in something else. They don't want the headaches of maintenance and things like that. So they're really good tenants, and they stay long, and you have less behavioral management problems. Tenants by circumstance, like I said before, tenants that are here today, gone tomorrow, they could care less about calling a place home. They just want a place to sleep. So you have to really focus on the different type of tenant mix that you're dealing with when you're buying these properties, and your vacancy factors and so forth like that. When you get into the psychology of buying your rental properties right the first time, you have to look at the tenants by choice, tenants by circumstance. What's going to affect a vacancy factor with your tenants by circumstance versus your tenants by choice? The students leaving during the summer, stuff like that. So back to the slide here on keeping the seller honest. You need to figure out with your net rent multiplier the security deposits. If they're non-refundable, you need to figure out maintenance, supplies, the property management, utilities, advertising, all those things you need to figure out. And I would suggest about a 3.5% to 4% to put aside for things, for improvements. You don't want to be buying groceries. A lot of first-time rental owners, whether they're accidental rental owners, meaning that they've inherited the property from their mom and dad, or they couldn't sell their property because the real estate sales in the market had dropped and you were forced to rent the property out. Your real estate agent needs to educate you on things like this. You don't, if you have a mortgage payment of $500 a month, and your rents are $1,000 a month, that doesn't mean you have $500 a month to blow, to go and buy groceries or to go and buy a set of tires for your truck or car. That money has to be put back into the rental property. If you're going to buy rental property, the only reason that you buy rental property is for a tax write-off in future growth, equity growth. Those are the only two reasons you should even be buying. And you should not ever touch the money on your property. It should be going back into the property. And the bad thing is you have to wait 30 years in order to realize all the labors that you've made in the past or in the present. So rental properties can be good, and rental properties can be a headache. You're spending Saturdays, every Saturday on the property and not on your own where you live. Your wife or your kids might be sick and tired of the phone ringing all the time. So you need to figure out what type of tenant mix that you want. So there's other investments out there besides real estate. If like I said, when you buy rental properties, you buy it for tax benefit and future equity growth. If you want cash flow to spend on groceries, you need to buy real estate trust deeds and notes, paper secured by real estate. And you can go to a website that I have. It's www.realestateFundingMachine.com. Again, that's www.realestateFunding, Funding, machine, MACHINE.com. That will talk a little bit about paper and how to create paper and how to buy paper at discounts and so forth. So that's just another webinar or video at some other time. But the next slide is that you need to get with an agent and make sure that he or she will help you in the following areas. And they have to fight for you. They're in it to protect your interest. Now they might have the listing side on the property that you're interested in. They're going to have an agency relationship with both of you. That's in our state, it's called limited agency. So you need to be aware of what limited agency is and what buyer's agency is and seller's agency. So and it will be different from state to state, but in our state, It's limited agent, buyer's agent, and seller's agent. And so you need to understand that, and they need to explain the ramifications for representing both sides. And when you're negotiating, your agent will have to say things to the buyer's or the seller's agent. Would you, based on the terms and conditions that you're selling this property on, would you buy the property yourself? Would you buy this property based on the terms and conditions that you're trying to sell it on? A lot of times the sellers won't. They would never go out and buy a rental property based on the terms and conditions that they're trying to sell the property on. So you need to be aware of that too. And to keep the sellers honest, you have to be sure to recognize the gross rent multiplier and the net rent multiplier and the net operating income. So very, very important. You need to find out what the seller's motivation is and also their limitations, and that's where a good real estate agent will help you there. When carrying on a conversation with the listing agent of the rental property, if you are aware of what the motivations and limitations are of the seller, you can make rational decisions when making your offer and buying the property right the first time. You have to always remember, and your agent needs to remember this too, strategies on negotiations that will allow you to make the best deal for yourself. So he who cares least will always win. So when you have the power of being able to walk away from the property, you're in a good position. But never get emotionally involved with the investment property that you're trying to buy. It might be near a synagogue or a temple or a place that you like, and you do not want to have emotions involved in your purchase. And you have to be aware of your 11th hour negotiations. And you never give the seller a request. You always want to be able to have a trade-off. For example, let's just say an example would be on a house that has acreage and also water shares. And the seller wants the buyer wants the seller to pay for the buyer's closing costs and prepaids on the property. And as an agent, you want to trade off. As a seller, you want to trade off with other items. Like, for example, if you had water shares with the property, you might say as the buyer's agent, or you might say as the seller's agent, you might say, well, yeah, we'll pay for your buyer's closing costs and prepaids, but you're going to have to understand that we got to make a trade-off here. So let's do away with these water shares. So on the bullet item on this particular slide, you need to be able to trade off for other items rather than just say, okay, that's fine. So you need to use logic to convince the seller that your numbers are realistic and that the seller's numbers are not. And usually when they sell, they sell based on emotion. So these are important things that you need to look at. Again, I want to give you that website that will help you out as far as buying paper, real estate trust deeds and notes. That's www.realestatefundingmachine.com. So anyway, that's it. I appreciate you coming to this webinar and taking an interest in what I had to say today. I do have other webinars that go on all the time. I talk a lot about residual income and how residual income is something that everybody needs. We're all going to have that day where we want to be able to take a vacation or we want some time off from work and have a residual income coming in to benefit you and your family and those that you love most. So everybody needs residual income. So again, I appreciate you, honestly, I really appreciate you coming to this webinar and checking things out. I just want to wish you the very best in your investment properties. My name again is Scott Thompson. I'm with Home Based Realtors, real estate brokerage here in the state of Utah. So Thank you, and if you'd like to send other people my way to watch this webinar, this rerun of the webinar or the actual webinar, please feel free to send people my way. Thank you, and make it a great day. Testing, 1, 2, 3. This is a test on this slide. 1, 2, 3. End of test.